Welcome to Rauta's retrospective videos. This time we go all the way back to early 90s with Finnish black metal. So this is part of the retrospective series in which I cover bands that I have been interviewing and talk about their careers thus far. Most of them are still active and this is one of them, Black Crucifixion. Now, without further ado, let's just tune in for the band's Metal Archive site, which should operate our backdrop and give you a little bit of insight while I guide you through, because other than that, this is mostly me, talking head, explaining things that are obvious to some of you out there and not so obvious to a lot of people out there, especially probably the younger generation who are maybe not that familiar with all the bands coming from early 90s. In the previous episodes, I've already gone through bands like Buried and Archgoat, and this time it's about Black Crucifixion, a band that was founded in 1991. So roughly the same era than Imbel, Nazarene, Archgoat, Buried, but a little bit later. Couple of years gap basically, but roughly in the big scale. Obviously we're talking about roughly the same era. What makes Black Crucifixion particularly fascinating is that something similar happened to them as Archgoat, and I'll get back into that. And also that they were very, very far from the north, exactly like Buried. They're coming from Laplandish part of the country. And it's curious that, so many bands in the Finnish black metal underground come from really up north. Whether we're talking about Buried, Black Crucifixion, Imbel Nazarene, or to a certain degree, Baratrum, they have their roots one way or another in the very, very Nordic regions. I mean, we're talking about way more northern part than any of the bands, old school mind you, coming from Sweden and Norway. Most of them, like for example in Norway, we're talking about bands coming from Bergen and Oslo mostly, which are the same level, like not that north, even when we're talking about Nordic countries. As you know, we could say Helsinki and Stockholm, relatively Finland and Sweden. And while Archgoat is from Turku, which is, again, on the same level as Stockholm, Helsinki, Bergen, whatever, Oslo. Other than that, a lot of Finnish bands, the old school ones, really come from the northern parts of Finland, and that is the kind of, geographically, a location where the days are longer when it's summertime. You probably heard the nightless night concept, meaning midsummer in Finland and other Nordic parts of the world where the sun doesn't really go down at all, during the midsummer time. But it's quite the contrary when we're talking about winter times. You barely have daylight that much, which is a thing related to Kaamos, a concept that basically there are dayless days, meaning very few hours of daylight given. And when you put this into the context, coming bands from the north, I mean, it's quite inspiring, quite obvious to a certain degree that when you come from the part of the world where darkness is surrounding you, it can be really, really inspirational for music in the black metal territory and other metal music, or music in general that is operating in the darker aspects of life and all. So, Black Crucifixion, a weird elephant in the room. And why weird is that it doesn't really have anything similar to going on with the bands I mentioned previously, Buried, Imbel, Nazarene, and Archgoat. Not that those three really have very, very little apart from the same genre boxing to do with one another. All these four bands are quite different, and when you include Baratrum in the mix, it's also a little bit different. But since the focus is on Black Crucifixion today, let's talk about that. So here on Metal Archives you will see genre labeled as black metal and then gothic/doom metal. This is not an error and not totally misleading, even though I wouldn't say it's exactly correct, but these are the topics you could go on, like which genre is more fitting to which other band and so forth. I would say gothic doom metal is a little bit off, but maybe not that wrong after all. Themes here, on the other hand, gather together some rather typical topics in black metal: occultism, Satanism, mythology, philosophy, history, metaphysics, and sovereignty, whatever it means in this context. Now, what is curious about the band that While it started early on in 1991 and soon came out with the demo, The Fallen One of Flames, which is kind of old school black metal. I mean, old school as 90s, not 80s. It has whispery vocals, which is not that typical when you're talking about the typical Bathoresque approach. Or even if you add Celtic Frost and some other early names into the world of black metal, for some reason Black Crucifixion decided to go other ways. When you're talking about the early 90s bands coming from Norway or Sweden, obviously most bands are more or less typical in the sense of the vocal styles. Shrieky, raspy, screamy, and Black Crucifixion was a little bit off from that stuff. Then again, this maybe has the same or similar element as with early Buried. Sometimes the vocal parts are whispered. So it kind of in the riff sense and the mood sense, atmosphere-wise, it goes into the box of black metal. But the vocal style is a little bit off, and maybe that's a hint of what to come later on, because Promethean Gift, the first non-demo release by the band, an EP in 1993, this was already a little bit different, not only in terms of music, in terms of songwriting and vocals, but also cover-wise. I mean, there's two guys carrying around this angel. You can kind of get it's more black metallic in a way, like, you know, how the angels are common revisited topic, but also I would say this could really be something like doom or some other style of music, so maybe not that typical after all for a black metal. And when we're talking about lyrics later on, this will be more evident. But there was a change really. I mean, you can see this shift from 1993 to 2006 with the debut album Faustian Dream. And the reason is this. These guys had the Promethean band back in the days, which is not listed on Metal Archives because technically speaking it's not metal, but more like rock music. And that is where the band kind of shifted on. Maybe they made the honest decision and, you know, decided to take this new side adventure, a spin-off under a different moniker, and went for Promethean. And as such, the Black Crucifixion era was like gone. And here, if you take a look, it says from 1991 present, like never inactive and all, but if we are truly honest about it, there was a moment when Black Crucifixion wasn't really so much active. I cannot give you any kind of facts or so. This is more like my understanding and through the history and gut feeling. So probably there was moments when this band was more or less hiatus, but they did come back and Promethean was basically gone. But in my opinion, it was an honest call to have a different name for this different band, even if it was with certain same members and all, because if you take a members list, Thorn is the only active one, a member from with E. Henrik from the early on in the 90s, and the rest of the guys rather newer ones. If you look, however, the past members, you will see a couple of old members, including certain Sodomatic Slaughter from Buried early 90s, and also Ari Wenstorm, who was then later on with other bands, and including Buried Live. So this was the original lineup, or original and Demonic Black Soul early on, but these guys didn't come back when it was time to kind of regroup and continue the story with the band with the original name. So certain different people have been in the band through the years, but not that many changes really given the history and the amount of years in the band. So more or less it focuses on Thorn and E. Henrik, which I did the interview with, you know, being the guys still bearing the torch and all. Now come Faustian Dream, 13 years later than the two first releases, the style had somewhat changed, and some people would say it doesn't really sound like black metal at all. Probably some people would put it more into the box of so-called dark metal, which was often used back in the days, you can call it 90s or early 2000s, and certain bands, including bands like Bethlehem for their dark metal album, were boxed in this kind of stuff, like not exactly, you know, the kind of satanic metal with a certain style, be it Nordic style or Greek style or other parts. You certainly had certain amount of certain kind of riffs, certain vocal styles, and usually certain production. Faustian Dream is not by means a bad album, but on the contrary, it's actually probably their best release so far, but it's very different First of all, it kind of gets very gloomy and in a way doomy. But there's also this feeling that it's kind of a more into melodic metal, gone a little bit doom stuff. And as such, dark metal might be more fitting. But then again, it was never accepted as one of those, set in stone kind of a genre definitions. It was more like a scene name, much like war metal is more of a scene than actual music style. Feel free to disagree once again, I don't care. But the point here is, maybe that's why this is boxed in black metal. Because certain satanic topics go throughout the band's history in lyrical sense, and it's easy to say, yeah, it's black metal, even though musically it's a little bit different. I mean, even if you did like, say, classic heavy metal, and you included certain topics of anti-Christianity, Satan and all that stuff, you probably wouldn't call it black metal, right? But technically speaking, there are people who say if it's metal and if it's satanic, it kind of again be called black metal. This is a never-ending debate most likely, so take it as you will. My point here is, this album went more into the dark waters, being it's very, very dark, it's very melancholic, and even a song called Scandinavian Melancholy, which is probably their best song ever. There's a strong feeling, and it's very bleak, very dark, not exactly depressive or suicidal, but borderlining that stuff. And as such, I think this Shore cover is very, very fitting. I mean, there's no beauty in that, except for the shapes and maybe the feeling, but I mean, not the classical sense. It's not full of hope and all. But it fits the mood here right very well. But if you take a look at the logo, which is just basic font basically, there is no indication of any kind of inverted crosses or anti-Christian and anti-religious, satanic and all that stuff. So this was more like intentional step away from the cliches or typical topics or styles artistically from the typical black metal. So I think it's easy to challenge this way. Is it really black metal? So, like I said, here it says black metal / gothic doom metal. I mean, it's kind of a fitting that you can go both ways and kind of get away with that. Took another 5 years for Hope of Retaliation to continue this band. It's not that different. And here it shows the band is now in very, very different territory aesthetically than the early years. And if you take a look at the list here, you will see it's mostly live tracks. So calling this a full album is a little bit like, I don't know. I mean, it has only 4 songs, which are studio tracks, and more tracks which are live, which you could technically say it's an EP with bonus tracks. Now, I'll let that for you to sink in and figure it out which way you want to call it, but yeah, it's a little bit different. And because of this has live tracks, meaning it's older tracks, so there's a little bit of recycling in that sense. Anyhow, lyrically, this is much going on with the very poetic style that started on quite early. Maybe not the early demo, but still, I mean, it started to become reality for this band with somewhere between Promethean Gift and Faustian Dream. And because I'm not including Promethean albums here, I really can't compare if the lyrical output there is very matching, but most likely, given that throughout the whole course, it's very poetic, it's more a thinking man's band in that sense, rather than straightforward like, I'm gonna crucify Jesus Christ, I'm gonna, penetrate the nuns on the altar kind of stuff, which you might find in bands like Archgoat. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's very, very different. So 2 years after the second album came Coronation King Darkness, and here you see once again it going in very peculiar directions. It's kind of a very interesting art, but not really sounding or looking like a typical black metal thing. And same goes with the lyrics here on this album. I mean, these are continuation, a successor to the previous albums lyrically as well as, I guess, musically. So the certain artistic style had been figured out by this time, and all these albums, Faustian Dream, Hope of Retaliation, Coronation of King Darkness, and lately Lightless Wild Chaos, which came 5 years later after the third album, these are all kind of a consistent in style. And as you can see, the style here goes with the, say, non-typical black metal band aesthetically and all. Once again, while the the band name Black Crucifixion is very, very sounding much like black metal, and you could say Lightless Violent Chaos is very, very fitting for a black metal album name. nothing aesthetically really resonates as like a typical black metal. Like I said, there are no symbols, there are no typical logos, and the cover art isn't exactly the most, aggressive, straightforward and all. And when we talk about the lyrics here, you don't care what the song titles are. I mean, Five-Pointed Eye, you could see a little bit pentagram there. Black hole metal is quite evident and all. But lyrically, once again, these rather short and sweet lyrics are more on the poetic side of things. You can read it so many ways, metaphorically or going different ways, and I don't think they are that obvious to give their message. Maybe it's more like, channeling a certain atmosphere or a certain feeling rather than, hey, I'm making a point here. For me, it's an interesting thing also that they decided to use in some songs both Finnish and English, like within one song, not just like this song is Finnish, this song is English, but include both languages, which makes it tricky when you're not Finnish-speaking citizen, because you kind of are going to miss some of the points here. I do like what they are saying in some of the lyrics, especially the Finnish kind, where the poetry comes more, becomes like a thing more obviously. I mean, it's more, how to say, more beautiful in a way. Maybe it's just expression because, native language, like me doing these videos as a Finnish person in English is not obviously that much, how to say, there's not so much variety. The spectrum of words is obviously more narrow if I was doing this in Finnish. However, I would say this is exactly the same with the band. While they are doing fine job writing down lyrics in English, the Finnish side is stronger, and it resonates differently because Finnish language is so different from English in various reasons. So throughout the years, the band that started more than 30 years ago have four albums out by now in 2024, and a couple of compilations to go with that. So not the most active bands, even throughout, let's be honest about it, ever since 2006 when they released the first album. They have been putting albums out every few years, and you really can't say it's been a lazy band. But now it's more than 6 years since the previous album, so maybe there is a little bit slowing down as people get older and all. What it's worth, however, is that Black Crucifixion is a unique band. It's not the heaviest, it's not the most aggressive, it's not the most sinister, vile, evil, not the darkest kind of black metal band out there. It's more on the verge of becoming kind of a soft. Do good in a way, and don't take, once again, this is in a negative way. I'm just pointing out rather obvious thing here. You can take this as more sophisticated or family-friendly take on black metal. By family-friendly I mean you could basically play this kind of a music to people who are not that familiar or into extreme metal and get away with it. And when they're like, what are we listening to? You could say, like, we're listening to Finnish black metal. What? I thought black metal was all about crazy, screamy, shrieky, raspy, aggressive vocals and, distorted guitars and sounding like they're coming from a dungeon. And Black Crucifixion is more, once again, sophisticated. Softer sound, the vocal style is softer, but not clean vocals or anything like that. So it is, in a way, kind of like easy listening black metal in that sense. Now, when it comes to the actual riffs and songs, how catchy or memorable that they are, now that gets trickier when we're talking about easy listening. They are not hit songs. They are more moody side of things, and definitely not for everybody. And once again, what it's worth, I would say these are more into the box of dark metal things, even if topics like Satan or denying God or mocking God are right there. And in that fashion, I really like that the band has never, stopped, never ceased to bring forth this certain message or style or whatever you want to call it. Overall, Black Crucifixion, while never becoming exactly a big band, are a very vital part of Finnish black metal history. You might not like the style because it's not for everybody. It's for acquired taste, I would say. But their momentum back in the days and coming back with somewhat interesting comeback is definitely worth checking out if you are interested in figuring out the puzzle pieces of the past. In my opinion, Black Crucifixion cannot be denied or ignored or passed. It's a fundamental part of Finnish black metal history, like it or not. And I think it's got to be worth something because it kind of shows that all these bands from very early 90s from Finland were different despite of the people's being connected to various bands like these bands, Buried Connection and all that stuff. But how they ended becoming totally different, it's interesting. And like I said, in the sense of being similar to Archcode in the history, was like both bands did early demos and then kind of vanished, only to come back later and maybe stronger than back in the days. Then again, this also has this kind of a buried approach that what started with, more typical black metal in a way, also went for different directions. Like in Buried's case, it went for ambience and dungeon synth and all, whereas Black Crucifixion went more into the gothic or doomier or dark metal style. So there are certain patterns when people get older and people figure out they want to do something else. But I guess that's a learning process, and Finland is no unique place in that sense, because obviously if you go for Norway or you go for Sweden, thinking of Bathory, for example, bands tend to change their style over the years. It's not like everybody is as stubborn as like, we gotta do the same fucking style for 30 plus years. But this is the beauty of art, this is the beauty of music. You're not bound to do what people expect, but to express yourself in a way you feel you're confident or comfortable with. Or whatever. I mean, I don't, start doing guesses why the bands decide to do certain style or change their style over the years. Anyway, enough rambling. Go to check out Black Crucifixion. It's an interesting band, even if it's not for everybody. And if you expect too much the traditional 1990s black metal from it, you're gonna be disappointed. But if you're ready for a ride that is a little bit different than your typical black metal band, it might be very, very interesting. So give it a go. I think it's worth giving a shot. And next episode in the series is going to be Barathrum. So let's talk about that later on with Barathrum retrospective coming your way. Meanwhile, off you go, explore, and you will find links provided in the description box. See you soon.